My name is Karama Hawashimidi. I'm a medical doctor. I'm a pediatric neurologist. I am Palestinian American. I live in Boston. I'm also the co-founder of Doctors Against Genocide. I want to thank the International Association for Genocide Scholars for having us today. This is very heavy. I think all the topics should be heavy. And this is, for us as medical professionals, this is the first time we are in this space. So bear with us. It is a betrayal of our oath to stay silent in the face of genocide. Genocide is a public health catastrophe. From the beginning to the end, the medical professionals have to deal with the aftermath and have to deal with what is happening. The effects of war crimes, crimes against humanity are central to health. The cost of genocide is measured by human life and human health. WHO is as we all know it, is defined health as a state of complete physical, mental, social well-being, and not just the absence of disease or infirmity. So, not only do you have to be healthy and not have disease, but you also have to have a good life. And that is the definition of health. The World Health Organization is a respectable body. It represents many medical professionals, and it has succeeded in eradicating smallpox, almost eradicating polio, and it has been literally founded to fight infectious disease, transmissible disease. It was founded by mostly Western medicine countries to protect the Western colonialist troops when they were traveling to Africa or Asia, pretty much colonizing. This is the origin of how WHO is, and it's something that we have to keep in mind. So, WHO also defined social determinants of health, which is how politics, how environment, education, socioeconomic class, demographics affect health, and it is an important concept that guides our work. Global health evolved from WHO, and it pretty much means practicing medicine beyond the borders of one's country, one's office, and one's medical center. And it is rooted in equity, health equity, human rights, and the desire to make the world healthier and better. Unfortunately, genocide, war crimes, and armed conflicts are a major barrier to improvement in global health. Therefore, we are here. Unfortunately, again, the number of genocides has increased significantly over the past 2 centuries. And it's not only due to reporting. The 20th century has been the bloodiest century out of all. The 21st century is promising to be the same. This is a map of the countries that have experienced at least one genocide. You can see that the genocides affected almost all of the world. This is a slide that is not showing. Just click it. Thank you. What it's showing here is that death from genocide by far exceeds death from war and even death from pandemics. Again, that is why the medical community should be involved. In Rwanda, death from genocide was 12,100 per 100,000 years, while malaria, HIV was significantly less, at least a tenth less. This brings us to effect of genocide on the current genocides right now. I will be talking about Gaza, I will be touching on Ukraine and DRC. For Gaza, unfortunately, as a medical community, this is a disastrous place for us, and this is where we should be very much focused. In Gaza, over 1,500, the numbers are now over 1,700 healthcare workers have been killed by Israel over the past 2 years. This is a reference from Doctors Without Borders. Effects of war crimes affect health, and I will explain quickly how. Most of all, bombs, weapons, explosives, landmines affect mortality by reducing basically death. So morbidity and mortality is very high. Indirect death, believe it or not, which is the effect of the armed conflict, the violence on health, are significantly even more than direct death by bombs. Women and children are the most vulnerable. 1/4 of the world population, 1/4, currently lives in armed conflict area. The majority of death happens amongst non-combatants. At the end of June 2024, 123 million people were forcibly displaced, especially because of armed conflict. 72 million are internally displaced. Internal displacement is actually a much worse outcome for the population because people remain in the area that has the violence with no access to health and no access to safety. In the past century, attacks on healthcare have intensified. Malnutrition is a massive disaster in areas of genocide because starvation is being used as a weapon. Maternal and infant disorders are significant in areas that are affected by genocide, and unfortunately the mental health repercussion from that is significant and it's everlasting. Malnutrition in particular, as a medical doctor, we all know that malnutrition is not just I am hungry for a few days and I'm fasting and that's it, once I eat it's better. Refeeding can be lethal, and people who are exposed to malnutrition lose cognitive skills, intellectual skills, their immunity is poor, they are much more likely to get chronic diseases, they are never financially independent, and their mental health is severely affected. Indirect mortality has been studied significantly. This is a very ambitious paper that studied 193 countries. It is a medical paper, and it showed that death from indirect causes dwarfs death from direct causes. Mostly communicable diseases, that is the biggest bulk of mortality, and then non-communicable diseases like chronic hypertension, diabetes that are being untreated can become lethal, renal diseases, and also recovery from injuries, and you can see here it's not as high as non-communicable diseases and communicable diseases just because people actually die in places of genocide because of the injuries, because there is no medical care. This is a summary of mental health effects on children in Ukraine, whether they are displaced or whether they stay within their country in armed conflict. The incidence of mental health stays roughly the same. Exposure leads to depression, anxiety, trauma, eating disorders, and an increase in substance abuse. DRC is one of the deadliest conflicts since World War II. Most deaths in DRC are preventable: malaria, diarrhea, measles, and malnutrition. Unfortunately, in DRC, sexual violence has been used as a weapon, and that leaves fractured and almost impossible to heal. In Gaza, life expectancy has dropped in the largest recorded single-year drop in modern history. In men, it dropped by 35.6 years. In women, it dropped by 47.5 years. A child in Gaza, once they're born, their life expectancy dropped to mid-40s. And that is because of not the direct injury, because of the diseases that are not being treated, the effects of malnutrition, starvation, and mental health issues. That is why Doctors Against Genocide is here. And that is why we are here to speak to our colleagues and try to figure out a way how to help. These are children from Gaza. These are children that I actually treated remotely. They both had traumatic brain injury with no recovery. Wounds in Gaza are extremely difficult to treat, and people die, children die because of wound infection that is normally prevented. The largest place for amputees is in Gaza. We are seeing children missing at least one limb, many missing 4 limbs. Our medical colleagues have been targeted. Dr. Al-Bursh was in detention, was raped, and was tortured to death. And Dr. Al-Safia has been incarcerated exactly from his workplace at Command One Hospital. There should be rules protecting non-civilians in war. And I want to start with the Islamic rules of war according to Al-Quran and Hadith. Do not kill any child, woman, or elderly person. Do not cut fruit-bearing trees or destroy inhabited areas. Religious sites, houses of worship are protected from attacks. The wounded, the ill should be treated and should be fed. You can never starve children and civilians. No burning crops, no poisoning wells. This is from 1400 years ago. In the Hindu culture, Indian culture, very similar. Do not strike the unarmed, the wounded, or those who surrender. Do not destroy trees, crops. A warrior should not slay one who has fallen, one who is frightened, or one who seeks refuge. The core principle of international humanitarian law that we know right now are very much based on these ancient rules. Distinction between civilians and non-civilians, proportionality, it should never be above and beyond what is expected. Necessity, only when it's absolutely necessary you attack. Humanity, there should be respect for the human people, for the humanity of the people that you're attacking, and protection of medical personnel and facilities. As we can see, none of these laws have been followed in any of these conflicts. And it is on us to prevent, react, rebuild, and the medical community has not been doing enough. The risk factors for genocide and politicide are actually well known, and it is almost like a disease pattern that one can predict, prevent, and work together against. There is also psychological risk factors for the perpetrators of genocide: exclusion from accountability, the tendency to dehumanize, scapegoat the victims, obedience to authoritarian leaders, self-interest. So there is a gain from genocide, desensitization, gradual exposure to cruelty makes people feel numb and they don't care anymore. Compartmentalized thinking, so we are responsible for making sure that the food does not get in. Someone else makes sure that the bombs are getting in, but they're not talking to each other, they consider it as a job. No big picture and no critical thinking of what is happening. Dr. Stanton's 10 stages of genocide have also been very monumental and important in our understanding of how genocide happens. If I have time, I can go through this, but I won't. This is why, after Against Genocide was founded, we submitted the medical definition of genocide to the United Nations as part of the health report by the rapporteur on the right to health, incorporated the medical definition of genocide in her reports to the UN, the yearly report. We are hoping that the medical definition of genocide will be something that we as a medical community adopt, learn, and use daily basis to define genocide, and not only to define genocide, to actually prevent genocide by learning the signs and the symptoms that lead to it and treat it as if it's a disease. It should have a low diagnostic threshold. We in the medical community, when we see a disease, we don't wait for 10 experts to tell us this is a disease. We actually diagnose immediately, and we prevent and we treat. And the delay and the wait for the legal experts and the wait for people to actually agree on the term is causing life every second. We have done a lot since we started Doctors Against Genocide. We have had press conferences in the Congress, in the Senate. We had several conferences. We visit our elected officials to pressure policymakers to stop genocide. We, our medical students work with us, nurses, psychologists. We try to build connections with policymakers to put pressure on them to end genocide and to educate them about what it means to have genocide. It is not just a paper and a signature. This is human lives and health. And I think I'll end. Thank you.
Notes didn't quite make it onto the uploaded version, so I'm going to hopefully not drop my computer. So good morning, my name is Dr. Fatah, and I am a Syrian-American physician, pulmonologist practicing outside of Washington, D.C. And I'm here today talking from my perspective as someone who is married to a fellow physician from Heslen. So for me, this topic is not only scholarly, but it is profoundly personal. Our family has lived through decades of displacement, siege, and loss, and with the permission of our family, I'm going to use some of their history to illustrate some of the points that I'm going to make in the talk today about how the evidence has been building for genocide in Palestine for many years. And it has crescendoed in the last 2 years. I think that their story will illustrate that it is part of a larger pattern of what I think a lot of you in the room, as genocide scholars, call a slow motion genocide that unfolds gradually, systematically, and predictably until the world finally begins to recognize what it is, and it calls it by its name, but unfortunately it's too late. And their story is not it is not unique, rather far from it. It is symbolic of every Palestinian family's story. Every Palestinian at this point has a Nakba story. Every Palestinian family has a story of displacement. Every Palestinian family has a story of being made a refugee when time's over. And now, unfortunately, every Palestinian family has a story of genocide. So, it was interesting. foundational pieces very briefly. In 1948, as many of us know, there was the Nakba, which we call the catastrophe, which destroyed 500 villages and displaced more than 750,000 Palestinians. But I want to call everyone's attention to the fact that there were 202,000 that were displaced to Gaza into 8 overcrowded refugee camps. And they continue to be confined within 1% of what is called historic Palestine, denied the right of return. So just please remember that the people of Gaza, they are refugees. And so now I want to just touch on some historical contributions to Nakba education with respect to my family. My husband's grandmother was actually part of the first generation to rebuild in the aftermath of the Nakba. She taught in the UNRWA schools in the 1950s and 60s and actually was the head principal of the schools across Gaza. And, I think you could possibly mistake these pictures of these small children for current day because that's how far we've regressed. She taught these children who were refugees and the children of Nakba survivors lessons about where they had come from, the villages that they had been displaced from and where they could not return to. And I mention this because she was beat many times by Israeli soldiers for providing this education. For her, I think that education was a mechanism to fight erasure. It was a way of her asserting that identity and dignity can survive even when siege continues. And so when I think about her and I think about her memory, I think about how crucial it is in terms of prevention of genocide to provide this sort of historic history, and that I think she understood inherently that just what was at stake. And so now I'm going to move to modern times. I know many of you're all familiar with this data. I'm not going to belabor it. But we know that the legacy of colonialism and occupation laid down the foundations of the current genocide that we're experiencing right now, with comprehensive evidence assembled by many bodies, including the UN in 2024, and in September of 2025, this UN Committee of Inquiry. This is essentially saying that the report concluded that 4 of the 5 acts of genocide defined by the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide have been committed, with intent to destroy Palestinians in whole or in part. And the mechanisms by which that genocide has been enacted has been through total siege, starvation as a weapon, targeting of children, sexual and gender-based violence and attacks on education, religion, and cultural systems, and the systematic destruction of healthcare. So to start with total siege, how has that been accomplished? Multi-generational families have been wiped out in single attacks. Entire neighborhoods have been erased. Survivors have been left in tents without water, electricity, or access to medical rescue or care. There have been deaths of over 70,000 Palestinians, including 20,000 people leave the Lancet. It's in the hundreds of thousands at this point with projections of much, much higher. The scale and the extent of the damage and the death is yet to be determined. We cannot get in, we cannot assess. I'll save that commentary for later. And so this is some examples of our family under siege. This leaflet, this is a photo that was provided to us by my husband's cousin. The leaflet in translation says, "Your presence in northern Gaza puts your life in danger. Whoever chooses to not leave northern Gaza, he may be identified as a partner of a terrorist organization." And is the video there? Where's the video? It's a shame. There we go.
Do you need audio?
Yes.
You have to play it.
Sorry. So I'll just describe what the video is. Yeah, no, as while we're plugging. The video is from my husband's uncle. It really is going to show you the density of population. He's actually a citizen of England, but he was trapped, as many people were trapped at the time. So he was reporting as things were happening in real time. And I think that his testimonies are very important because, as we know, journalists have been targeted. And I think that this gives you a sense of the absolutely insane nature of what was happening, particularly in the beginning of the war. Okay. In any case, can we like go back? Can we help us?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure. Let's check. Let me see. Okay, I'm gonna just play it here, guys. I'm just gonna play it. It's fine.
Yes.
Maybe
Yes.
it's
Okay.
What play?
No, it's not that. You have to give the owner of this file has to give access to my device.
Okay.
But
Okay, is it? I'll make it free.
In any case, if I have time, I'll figure it out. I'll show it later. And I'm happy to share it with whomever. I think you guys get what this is. Okay. It's okay, we're good. She doesn't have, there's no. Okay, so moving on to the next method, starvation as a weapon. So over 500,000 Palestinians have been experiencing starvation. More than 450 people have died from malnutrition. Food prices have been fluctuating depending on the amount of aid and the availability. Farmland is being damaged and left inaccessible for use. I just want to briefly mention, so my sister-in-law was actually in charge of an effort to provide seedlings so that the people of Gaza could plant themselves in their limited capacity. And the Israelis found out about this, and he was targeted, Yusuf, and he was killed. And so that effort died with him. Next we have some messages. I'm not going to read all of them, but essentially this is just messages from my husband's cousin talking about their situation, how they were starving, and how if the bombs didn't kill them, they were going to die from starvation. And we actually have family who was in fact trying to make food from animal feed. Next, moving on, as many people will recall, if you're 16, if you were 16 in Gaza, at the time, at the start of this genocide, you would have experienced prior 5 episodes of attack, with 2023 being the initiation of the 6th attack. And these have major implications. Moving on, before 2023, because this didn't start in 2023, and I'm just highlighting two, that's really interesting. We have, there have been many murders of children within our family. I'll just mention that in 2009, Operation Cast Lead, 1,400 Palestinians were killed, 300 children. In 2014, Operation Protective Edge, 2,000 Palestinians, 500 children. And 9 members of my husband's family were killed in Yunus, including 5 children, 4 of whom are pictured here. Yada Nadine, Abu Rahman, and Jane Muhammad is not pictured here. And they were the victim of a double tap. And so the building was bombed. They had, it was 4 o'clock in the morning, and they died within 45 seconds of that first tap because the second bomb came, and they died in front of their building because they didn't quite make it. And so, beyond that, we have targeting of numerous children in Palestine since 2023. Over 20,000, we think it's much, much more, and they represent at least 30% of all victims. Part of what I mentioned here, what you'll see is that there's a disproportionate number of primary school children. And the consensus is that it's because parents were able to pick up the babies and the toddlers and run. But the older children can run fast. And it's this middle group of children who cannot run fast enough to escape when there's an opportunity to escape. And on the other side of the photo, so these are pictures of my husband's family. These are children of our family. And I just want to say that, so I actually discovered this scrolling on X one morning, of work. And I can't read Arabic fluently, and so I had to count the bodies. And I had to go to my husband before work and tell him, I'm very sorry, but I think that 11 more children in your family have been killed. And then we confirmed it, and then we had to be the ones to spread the news to his entire family because they didn't actually know. And I spared you a photo of 14-year-old Muhammad, who was on his way to get bread. This was in August of 2024, and he was targeted by a quadcopter. And I discovered his photo as well on Instagram, and he was lying on the ground with blood-covered pea bread. And that's what happened to him. So we know that there's been extensive sexual and gender-based violence. I'm going to move on, I don't have a lot of time. We have reproductive genocide. This actually, I think some of you might find this fascinating, is actually my husband's uncle's clinic. This was cited in the UN Commission of Inquiry to Act of Genocide, falling under the category of proposing measures intended to prevent births among Palestinians in Gaza. This was Dr. Nayanini, who's Cambridge-trained fertility expert, and he established this clinic in 1997. The clinic is named after my husband's first cousin, Basma. And in late 2023, the clinic was bombed by the Israeli forces. The bombs blasted the liquid nitrogen, destroying off the tanks, destroying 4,000 embryos and 1,000 specimens of unfertilized eggs. There had been umpteen attacks on educational, religious, and cultural sites. And as part of the commission, Commissioner Pillay said, we are seeing more and more indications that Israel is carrying out a concerted campaign to obliterate Palestinian life in Gaza. Israel is targeting the educational, cultural, and religious life of the Palestinian people will hurt the present generations and the generations to come, hindering their right to self-determination. We have systemic destruction of healthcare. You can see the statistics here. And what I would add is that the inability to effectively deliver medical care has impacts not only on the acutely wounded, but also on chronic medical conditions, which Dr. Kamal started to tell us about. There are no living attendings of nephrology in Gaza. There are no pathologists in Gaza. So there is no ability to diagnose, much less treat cancer. I can tell you as a pulmonologist that anyone with chronic respiratory failure is dead, because there is no ability to provide adequate oxygen within a hospital, much less outside of a hospital. 19 of the 20 oxygen producing facilities destroyed. We have colleagues who are literally running with tanks between facilities under gunfire to try and refill portable tanks to provide oxygen to patients in hospitals. And moreover, there are going to be massive implications with respect to inhalational injuries for the survivors of this genocide from aerosolized concrete and asbestos. We don't even begin to understand what we're going to be facing. This here is slide 1 of 17, documenting a timeline of destruction of healthcare in Gaza. This is a DAG, something that was a DAG initiative. And it needs to be updated because the most recent attack on UNCC Children's Hospital is now been rendered completely non-functional. This is a repeat attack on UNCC. And so the series of slides will give you a very tangible understanding of the scale of the attacks on the healthcare system. And I invite you, if you'd like to have access to these slides, you can scan the QR code. And so I'm going to say this. So in early 2024, my son, who was 9 years old at the time, asked me if Gaza was going to live. And I told him the only way that I knew how to answer was that I didn't know. And so he followed up with this question, well, if Gaza dies, does that mean I'm not Palestinian anymore? And it broke me. So to date, 219 of my husband's family on his mother's side have been killed. And we're talking about delineating, like, how far out do you count? What constitutes family? Is it the children of your cousin? Is it the children of your more distant cousin? Where do you draw the line? Whose family? On his father's side, there have been over 50, and many of them remain under the rubble of the homes. Every outrageous type of death, preventable death, that you have heard of, Our family, like every other Palestinian family, has suffered. They have baby Sabr, who froze to death in a tent on the Rafah border, who's 20 days old, after the family had evacuated along a safe route. We had the children killed by quadcopters. We have cousins who died of non-fatal injuries turning fatal because of lack of access to care. And we have 3 elderly aunts who were shot at point-blank range, 2 dying very quickly, the 3rd being left to die slowly. She called her neighbors, who were not allowed to come and to retrieve her. And so we have videotapes or audio recordings of her slowly dying and of her saying that the Israelis have set the house on fire. And so she was burned alive. And they would not allow the family to come to retrieve anything for 3 days, and finally they did. And she was a wheelchair-bound elderly woman, so what was left were the ashes, some bones, and a metal wheelchair. And most recently, we have a child in the family who died going to the Gaza Humanitarian Fund site to try and obtain food. So, amongst all of these killed were children. We talked about that. There were also doctors, pharmacists, lawyers, engineers, people like all of us within this room. And so for me, my son's question is a reminder that genocide is not just about extermination. It is about everything before it and everything after it. It's about erasure. And so medicine teaches us that prevention is always better than treatment, and so too is genocide. And so I'll close with this dedication. This collage is in memory of the Al-Farra and Haddad families and all of those lost to preventable violence. May remembrance become action. May we carry their stories forward not only in grief, but in purpose.
Thank you very much. Probably need the break.
So I believe capture the intention of the law because they it's the stage of dehumanization and they are refusing to be human. They are discovering their humanity.
Actually, while we're doing the audiovisual, if anyone has questions. Yeah, one question.
I have a comment, if you don't mind.
Yeah, let's go with the comment, sir.
I'll stand up, because otherwise we won't say this. And Dr. Against Genocide is part of our lives in genocide. And I think Dr. Merle and Dr. Moore both came to my house in Ukraine and had dinner with them. And so, by the way, this guy really
The food was good.
But what I want to mention, I just had a comment on a couple of the things that were said by Dr. Merle and also by, I'm sorry. First thing, what became clear in the first presentation, essentially the question of principle. This is something that doctors have been saying. Almost nobody else does it. In fact, there's a whole book by Dorsey, who's an Israeli, theorist, social things. He says there's two ways to think fast. Slow is the way to analyze things. But when you put down brakes in a car, you have to think fast. And I know Paul Stoller just picked up on this. He's a social scholar. He says the trouble in genocide is people think slow, whereas it's a catastrophe. What we need is thinking fast. And that's why that's the key of prevention. And one of my colleagues in Israel who's epidemiologist said, essentially, listen to the doctors. Because they understand the immediacy of the need. Probably better than anyone. And then secondly, her presentation was, I was trying to my refugee emphasize personalism and justice. What she just did was exactly that. Because people will respond when they know a person has been affected. Statistics don't even touch it. And Paul Stoller, who's the social psychologist out of Oregon, actually experiments showing this. You may read some of his work. I mean, he showed pictures of little kids in Mali that started. If he showed one picture, he could get people to give him $5 to help this kid. If he showed a picture and said, this is representative of thousands of kids in the South, say, oh, we're dying for federation. The contributions that we go down to years ago. In other words, just what she just did, personally, especially if it's children. That's
Thank you, Dr. Santos. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you, Abla, for what you said. My name is Mesa Hawash. I'm a Palestinian. I currently live in Canada, and I'm a trained physiotherapist. I'm currently the executive director of Global Partnerships and Strategy of Against Genocide. I began my career in Palestine as a physiotherapist, working with individual patients, helping them recover movement and function over injuries, spent years with organizations afterwards, working on building equitable, inclusive organizations. When I was working in Palestine as a physiotherapist, I worked with a lot of young men and women that were injured. They had spinal cord injuries. There was a huge uptick in spinal cord injuries in occupied Palestine, which led to paraplegic injuries. And that was my training, and that was my work in Palestine. When I moved to Canada, I worked a lot with organizations to help build inclusive and equitable systems. And now with Doctors Against Genocide, we are working we're focusing on collective recovery, rebuilding systems, communities, and structures that allow people to live with dignity after devastation. So when we talk about post-genocide recovery, we often imagine a period that comes after the violence ends, But the reality in many cases is that recovery starts when genocide is still active, and has to actually begin when the genocide is active. When the violence is ongoing, the survival itself requires immediate rebuilding. And this is why the role of doctors and healthcare workers is so essential. So recovery is not a single milestone. It's a long process of reclaiming life, dignity, and agency. It involves rebuilding not just the physical structures, but the trust and stability that hold societies together. Each genocide, of course, is unique, shaped by its own history, politics, and geography. There is no universal model of recovery. But what works in Rwanda and Bosnia cannot simply be applied in Gaza or Congo. Recovery has to be rooted in local knowledge and expertise, led by those directly affected. As I'm putting the slides together, I actually reached out and received guidance from our colleagues in Gaza, doctors, humanitarians, and I want to give credit to one special individual, Iyad Amawi. He's a journalist and the coordinator of NGOs in Gaza. He has given me a lot of guidance as I'm putting these slides together to understand what would it really take to rebuild and recover in Gaza. So I thank Iyad for his contributions. So in the case of Bosnia survivors, we know that survivors are still waiting for justice after decades, because impunity has kept wounds open and allowed cycles of violence to continue. In Rwanda, reconciliation programs has helped rebuild communities, but trauma remains deeply embedded, passed down to new generations. In Congo, as we know, sexual violence has been weaponized and used as a weapon of genocide, destroying the social fabric and the mental health of entire communities. In Sudan, the failure to hold perpetrators accountable has allowed new forms of ethnic cleansing to emerge and weaponizing starvation. Among indigenous peoples, including the Palestinians, genocide took the form of forced assimilation, cultural erasure, and land theft. Slower in pace sometimes, but equally devastating in its persistence. Each case, of course, is different, but the underlying patterns repeat themselves. Dehumanization, denial, the breakdown of justice, loss of agency, and long-term public health consequences. In Gaza, where genocide, of course, is still unfolding in real time, and as Adlan has mentioned, it did not begin in 2023. We have seen this for nearly 2 decades in Gaza, but also since the British mandate in the occupied Palestine. So it's been over a century of ongoing genocide. Gaza specifically has faced continuous attacks on life, healthcare, and infrastructure. Hospitals have been destroyed, but also rebuilt multiple times. Schools, water systems, and homes have been repeatedly attacked. Despite all this, the people in Gaza continue to rebuild. Not only physical spaces, but also their sense of purpose and community. They rebuild hope, and that's a huge part of recovery. We have seen starvation used as a weapon, journalists, doctors, and aid workers systemically attacked and targeted, entire hospitals and universities wiped, erasing years of progress. And still, life continues. Families gather to pray. Doctors still operate under the most unimaginable conditions, often with very limited supplies and sometimes using mobile phone lights because there's no power. And, even when they have lost colleagues and family members, and we know a lot of our colleagues, doctors in Gaza, they've faced tremendous personal loss themselves. So what Gaza teaches us about recovery is that it's ongoing. To rebuild, it's a process that is an ongoing process. It begins in the decision to keep going. In the face of destruction, every time a child continues to learn, every time a mother sings to her children under the sound of drones, every time a teacher starts teaching an attempt, that's actually part of recovery. And you've seen that in Gaza very clearly. So when we talk about recovery, it's not just a one-step process. It's a process that unfolds across several dimensions. It's about building what was destroyed, but it's also about restoring trust, dignity, and agency. Starting with physical and economic, it's probably the most visible form of recovery. Rebuilding hospitals, schools, and homes, but also rebuilding infrastructures that are necessary for survival and thriving. You know, this is restoring access to essential services, clean water, education, electricity, the foundation that allows a community to function and thrive again. There's also the psychological dimension, which doesn't really only include the destruction of the physical bodies, but we know that genocide fractures societies. It fractures minds, families, entire generations. Recovery requires addressing the collective grief that lingers long after the violence ends. It means providing trauma-informed care, mental health services, and spaces where people can heal. This work often takes decades, and it starts and it doesn't end with atrocities, and it gets passed down unless it is healed. Then there's the social and political dimension, the one that is often neglected, because that's the one that requires justice and accountability. And we've seen, and we'll see through a lot of the presentations, I'm sure, during this conference, is that accountability is always a missing link in recovery and in handling atrocities. Because that requires rebuilding governance, restoring trust in institutions, and ensuring that accountability is incorporated in all the work that happens. This is why at the core of all these efforts we say genocide prevention is preventative medicine. If we can strengthen these systems early, physical, psychological, and political, we can save lives before another collapse happens. So at Doctors Against Genocide, we developed what we call a model for activating recovery during genocide. We work with healthcare workers in Gaza. We work with organizations like Healthcare Workers Watch to collect evidence and use that as part of our advocacy. We also work with our colleagues in Gaza and provide insights into the actual situation in Gaza. We strongly believe that listening to the survivors, listening to the people that are impacted by genocide is a huge part of recovery, and this is why we center the voices of Gaza, the Congo, Haiti, and anybody who's impacted by genocide as part of our collective healing process and recovery process. We've also submitted a report to the United Nations that provided a medical definition of genocide, because we really recognize that the legal framework has failed, that we need something more proactive, more preventative, and rooted in justice that not only looks at intent, but looks at impact, and creates a system that mobilizes healthcare workers to act immediately to prevent atrocities and genocide. Through our campaigns, and you see some of the campaigns are actually here, so this is, where's the other one? We Are Sick from Genocide is one of our campaigns where we recognize the moral injury that healthcare workers face as they are seeing these atrocities and being oppressed and not able to actually deal with it. So this moral injury of not being able to intervene and fulfill our oath and duty to prevent atrocities has created this genocide. So through our campaigns, we mobilize healthcare workers to channel that energy into constructive work. We've also led conferences and education, really creating spaces that are interdisciplinary, that bring people together to think of solutions that are, again, proactive and preventative in nature. Our recovery pathways also include survivor-centered relief efforts, and this is really coming directly from our colleagues in Gaza. So we take their guidance not only for advocacy, but understanding what relief looks like for them. For example, we have raised funds to rebuild parts of our Shipping Hospital, using only local expertise. The engineers were local, the people who were going to execute the build were also local, and the expertise was sourced locally. We believe in that agency and sovereignty of any relief effort. Samir Foundation is an organization that we support that's really rebuilding the new generation of healthcare workers and doctors. And we support the most vulnerable communities, for example, communities with visual disabilities and other vulnerable communities in Gaza. And all this is guided and directed by the people themselves. Because true recovery begins only when the most harmed lead the process, and this is a core foundation of the recovery process. And of course, justice ultimately is the foundation of recovery. To rebuild, we must first be seen, which means centering survivors, demanding accountability for perpetrators, refusing silence. It means truth, reconciliation, reparations, and the right of return. It means self-determination, because there can be no health without freedom. Genocide prevention at its core, preventative medicine. It's about saving lives before they are lost. As long as genocide persists, recovery must remain an active verb, something we do together across borders and disciplines. But recovery also requires a shift in how we see resilience. In humanitarian development in humanitarian language, resilience is described as the capacity of individuals, households, communities, or systems to anticipate, prepare for, respond to, and recover from shocks of stress, including conflict, natural disasters, of course, genocide. But in colonized contexts like Palestine, recovery is an act of defiance, actually. We in Arabic use the word sumud. Sumud means steadfastness, which is the resilience with purpose. It's survival, but also endurance. It's embracing life even when everything around us screams destruction. And it's actually the insistence on surviving within the most horrific conditions that defines what sumud is. And it actually comes from our, as indigenous people, our connection to the land and our insistence that we belong on that land, and that is really part and parcel of our recovery process. So it's not just escaping the atrocities, and it's not just taking care of ourselves as individuals, but it's reaffirming our connection to land and our indigenous pride. So we always say never again, but it means nothing without prevention. We see, as I said, that genocide prevention is preventative medicine. We must actively recover pathways during genocide, not after genocide. It requires cross-movement, interdisciplinary work. Every genocide is unique, as we see. This slide here is actually art that was created by a Palestinian artist that commemorates 12 months of the genocide. So we use this to create our first calendar that has painful documentation of systemic attack on healthcare, recognizing our colleagues, and also documenting massacres. This art is just a testimony that centers the voices of people in Gaza. And, in closing, I want to say that genocide seeks to kill not only the people, but their future. And our work as healthcare workers is to reinstate that hope through everything we do. Finally, I want to recognize that there have been organizations that has recognized genocide in Gaza. This is just a sample of them. We are hoping actually by the end of this conference that the hosting organization will recognize genocide in Gaza, because it's quite shameful, quite honestly, that we are still actually asking for recognizing genocide. This is really part of our role in advocacy, and it's part of reinforcing accountability and justice. Is first recognition. Thank you. This is the end of my remarks. We look forward to working with you.
So again, thank you everyone for being here and for giving us the opportunity, for inviting us. And thank you for my colleagues for having a great, presentation about the genocide, what happened in Gaza. I'm gonna just give some, closing remarks just to summarize things up. As expected, I don't have a slides. I lived before the Genocide Convention, but it doesn't matter. So we began with Gaza. Oh, before that, let me say my name. My name is Dr. Abdullah Jabour. I'm also a Palestinian doctor, the co-founder of Doctors Against Genocide. We began with Gaza not as a case study, but as the living pulse of our shared humanity. 20,000 children. Let that sink in. 20,000 children murdered in front of our eyes in the last 2 years. The actual numbers is going to be much higher. These were just the number of children that they could collect their parts. Many more are still missing, many more are still in the rubble, and many, many more are living with amputations and life-changing long-term disabilities. 1,800 healthcare workers murdered. That is more than the number of healthcare workers who have ever been murdered in any conflict in recordable history. Hundreds of healthcare workers are still being tortured in torture and concentration camps to this moment. While we speak, they are being murdered, they are being murdered, tortured, and raped under the demand of the Israeli public, the Israeli religious scholars, the Israeli Knesset members, the Israeli media. The Israeli population is demanding the rape of doctors and prisoners in their torture camps. That's all documented, it's all public. This is not an accusation. Entire generations raised in real time while the world is still debating definitions. Their silence calls medicine, law, and scholarship to speak with one more voice. For too long, medicine has treated the wounds of genocide, but not its causes. We have healed the injured while ignoring the structures that keep producing injury. Occupation, apartheid, starvation, displacement. Our oath to preserve life became detached from justice. This is the medical failure. I'm going to say it again. Our oath to preserve life became detached from justice. But medicine cannot be neutral between life and death. And genocide, unlike disease, is the most preventable cause of death on this planet. Doctors Against Genocide was founded before October 7th, not in reaction, but in warning. We were doctors who saw the signs, the dehumanization, starvation, siege, the systematic dismantling of health care itself, the complete control over a vulnerable population's life, death, food, and dignity. We raised the alarm. We spoke in medical, legal, and moral terms. But our warnings were dismissed as exaggeration, as discomfort, as politics. The structures that made this genocide possible, occupation, apartheid, total domination, continue to exist today. That was not born from inspiration by anyone, but from necessity. From Palestinian doctors who grew up under siege, occupation, apartheid, dehumanization, and understood that silence kills. We saw genocide coming, and when the war turned away, we built a movement to confront it. With evidence, with ethics, with courage. Like disease, genocide has early warnings, a prodrome. Before the bombs, there is language. Before the massacres, there are policies. Before starvation, there is dehumanization. Doctors are trained to act at the first sign of collapse. So must humanity. The field of genocide studies was created to warn humanity, but it has too often became a field of autopsies. We gather data after the graves are full. We debate definitions while hospitals burn. Never again has never been universal. It is urgent for some, hesitant for others, and non-existent at all for Palestine. If prevention includes one people, it fails all. Institutions that remember must also recognize. Education without moral clarity becomes complicity. Silence of the face of mass death is not neutrality, it is betrayal. Even our own IAGS organization recognized the Gaza genocide 2 years too late. More than 500,000 lives too late. Recognition delayed is recognition denied. The hosting organization where we are now continues to refuse to recognize the genocide, as well as every Holocaust and genocide institution in the whole world. Not a single one of them recognized a genocide. In December of 2023, when we called upon the Holocaust Museum of the United States to be the first one to call it out, because that is their job. They are the experts. They are the ones who should tell us. The minute we raised that question to them, we were all called anti-Semites, and we were all canceled and almost thrown into jail. Let us be honest. Our global prevention is broken. Even a weather agent that cannot stop a storm can still save lives by warning. But genocide is not a storm. It's deliberate, designed, and preventable. Which means if we really warn, we can save everyone. If we warn early enough, we can save everyone. This is not a natural disaster. This is a man-made disaster and catastrophe. If it was a man-made, then it can be a man's stop.
That's right.
If we do our job, all of us, the failure of prevention is not a failure of knowledge. It is a failure of courage. And courage, like oxygen, must be continuously supplied, or humanity suffocates. Doctors Against Genocide offers a new model, a medical model of prevention, grounded in impact, not intent. We don't care about intent, we care about life. We want to protect and preserve the sanctity of life before it's gone. Early detection, rapid response, clinical ethics applied to collective survival. When a patient collapses, we do not wait to prove intent. We act immediately to save their life. So we must act when a population collapses through famine or bombardment or blockade. We intervene. Justice, to be meaningful, must be prophylactic, not post-mortem. Accountability after the fact is just a mere memorialization. Accountability before the next crime, that is prevention. Accountability is the vaccine against repetition. Our goal is not condemnation, but collaboration. Scholars built the theories. Medicine brings the tools. Together, we can contrast or construct a living prevention system. A living prevention system, not on books, not on the United Nations resolutions. We need a living prevention system that has a life, that can intervene in time. One that can protect the living, not study the dead. We invite you as genocide scholars, as doctors, as human beings, to build this new framework with us, to make this field worthy of the lives we claim to defend. Because ultimately, the stethoscope, the law book, and the archive share one purpose: to preserve life. Our task, again, is not to study death, but to defend life. Courageously, consistently, and without exception. Liberation is not ideology. Liberation is the restoration of health to humanity itself. Liberation, justice are medicine. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to open for questions or comments or reflections, how we can proceed forward together as a United Nations.
I also want to thank Lexi here, who was the driving force behind our presentation. Without her, we would not be here today.
Yes, we thank Lexi, we thank everyone who's here, but one more thing for Dr. Stanton. Dr. Stanton has been in the field of combating genocide for the last 50 years since Cambodia. He was sent there on a mission by the State Department.
Now, the church for service, the State Department, member of the Senate.
No? But I think you were on the State Department, then you will, okay, yes.
Then I have to.
And he's been fighting and combating and trying ways to combat genocide since then. And for that, we are all grateful and honored to have him here, and honored to have him as a mentor. We learn a lot from your knowledge. We use the 10 steps of genocide that you came up with in almost every meeting we have with our doctors and colleagues. And we want to make this as part of the curriculum of medical education, medical schools, because we want the doctors, the students, healthcare workers to know these steps and to look for them and to make them reportable by the healthcare workers themselves. So thank you, Dr. Sam.
Thank you.
Questions? Comments?
Please go on first. Oh, please, first. Okay. Gratitude is beyond words. Words fail to say thank you.
You want to come?
No, you would not see me. I'm very small. I come from Serbia, and I dealt with a lot. I've still been dealing with the genocidal aftermath in Bosnia, and I will say, although it's not decided by the legal international community, also in Kosovo, what we've been experiencing together, the survivors, especially in Bosnia and Srebrenica, is this accelerated aging and the failure because of the weakness of the medical system. I may say that the whole Balkans is on Xanax. Mental health is broken, and people are not able to deal with their everyday lives. Not that they are failed, but they are the system, the structures is not working, and also health workers are leaving. Even me, I'm giving German lessons to health workers because they cannot work and deal with the failed system. My question is, because you all talked also about this education, genocide education, and introducing into curricula for health workers, and we've been also working with health workers also concerning aging, mental health, and also, please correct me, polypharmacy treatment, because this is also very tricky with many patients, younger patients, older patients. Do you also envision this? Because unfortunately what we testify in Palestine, us through our friends, and you from your experience and your beloved ones, do you also envision or develop guidelines, plans for this aftermath to confront the health troubles that will, unfortunately, as you say, emerge? Yes, it's for all of you who can answer. Yes,
Every one of us will try, but constantly we ourselves are victims of genocide. We are struggling ourselves, we are sick, mentally sick ourselves. I'm taking Xanax myself. I've been taking Xanax for 2 years.
I can understand.
And I think many victims, the actual direct victims of the genocide in Gaza are having much worse than us. The genocide in Gaza is even much worse because it has been live-streamed to the whole world. I think all humanity is being sick of genocide. Our children, whether in the United States, whether in South Africa, UK, everywhere, our children have been broken forever. Seeing children like them with their bodies blown to pieces or starved to death. So I don't think we have the answers. We are trying to figure them out as we go ourselves. That's why we're reaching to everyone. We need a collective knowledge from the medical community, other communities that has been through genocide to build something to help all of us. There is, as we know, there's generational trauma, unfortunately, that's going to affect everyone. And when we talk about the people who are gonna live with, you know, amputees and, you know, lifelong disabilities, that's gonna be a major problem. I think during the bombardment, people are feeling for their lives, so they're not feeling the whole impact or the mental impact of the genocide. Once the bomb stops, I'm afraid it's going to hit them and hit us hard.
This.
All I cared about a week ago is please stop the bombs. Stop the bombs. That was the only question. Now, if the bombs do actually stop, we hope it does, but I cannot trust it, but even if that happens, I really think we are going to get even harder, feel worse. Oh my God, what has happened? How is this sole surviving child, his whole family, with 3 amputated limbs, going to survive a whole life, and now not feeling, you know, for being bombed, has to think about all of it. And about the starvation, I think our latest drama, the effect and long-term effect of starvation about the development of children or adults, whether physically or mentally, but Dr. Hawash is the expert in this, so I'll leave this for you.
Thank you.
So I'll be brief, but I think I want to be positive. And you know, once there is no bombs, I think it's time for us as a medical community and for the international community to start introducing the safety, the positive life experiences, the education system, the support from the international community, and the ability to narrate, the ability to storytell, and you know, just have platforms to listen. We have the weekly webinars, and we have a lot of our colleagues from Gaza. We also have colleagues from Congo, and we have colleagues from Gaza, from Sudan, who come and talk to us. One of the things one of the doctors said is that I come to this webinar because it is like my weekly gym visit. It is my therapy. So for us, this means we need to listen. We need to give the platform to listen. Even the child who is amputated, we have to listen to his or her story and show them that we care, that you still matter, and we still care about you, and give them as much positive opportunities for positive experiences as possible. It is so painful. At the same time, being able to rehabilitate is so exciting.
I'll try to be brief as well. I want to first thank you for sharing your story. And something I didn't talk about in my talk was that, you know, I'm a medical doctor, but I've actually been impacted by genocide in the sense that my family took in a Bosnian family when I was 17, and they lived with us for 1 year. And it was immensely informative on how I view the world. And so I thank you for that. And so with respect to the long-term consequences, yes, I have seen what has happened to Viviana and Marco and Judy. I've seen it. And I've seen what happened to his sister-in-law, brother, his husband, who was shot and sniped in the arms. So I thank you for sharing that. And so, you know, I think one of the things that we're trying to do proactively is we understand that, you know, Rama coined the phrase sick from genocide. You know, we are, in terms of the people that are in the world outside what's happening in the areas of conflict, those of us who are in the Palestinian diaspora, you know, I mean, when I told the stories about what has happened in my husband's family, the part that I didn't talk about is that, you know, not to censor the diaspora or myself, but to let's just talk about it though. There is secondary trauma to all of us, you know. We discover these things. You just, in medicine, we just have to cut ourselves off, you know. I literally just shut it down, go to work, take care of patients, deal with first world problems, and move on. And there's no time to process. It's very similar to how I felt during the COVID pandemic as a pulmonologist who felt very betrayed by my community at large. And so, it's very similar, I mean, and I'm getting off topic, but, talking about the decimation of healthcare, the COVID, and during COVID, one of the things that was so devastating was the head of the COVID pandemic task force in Brazil was murdered in his home along with his children, buried under the rubble. So when you think about impacts, but anyway, to get back to the point that we're talking about here, sick from genocide, we would like to get it like an actual formal diagnosis, get it in our psychiatric curriculum, have a curriculum for diagnosing, treating, and preventing.
Thank you.
Again, as my own personal experience and suffering from secondary, maybe first degree genocide, I don't know how you call it, but I just realized that, like for me and for a lot of us, I think the antidote to sick from genocide has been taking action, and it's been reframing our role as not only as citizens, but as healthcare workers, as community workers, and how we actually channel that grief into real constructive action. And then this is the part of it, and actually finding that community, which I think Against Genocide has done in the past 2 years, is to build that community for us to come together and think solutions, instead of internalizing that grief and not taking action. So for me, that has been very transformative, and building those communities. Yes, please. Please, our speaker. And thank you for wearing the keffiyeh. Thank you so much.
No, it's from Bethlehem last year.
Thank you for the keffiyeh. I want to add one more thing, I'm sorry. But because it's so important, and again, as I told you, don't have any access, we're just our attempts at this. So, storytelling, sharing stories, group therapy, I think it has been something that will be really good. Having a different being, learn with groups together, having the other people in the world listen to their stories, center them was something important. And one key issue is accountability.
Yes.
Accountability not as a vengeance, not as a punishment. Accountability is to replace our itself. Because if you know that whoever committed this got held accountable, it gives you some psychological healing. Accountability is also important because the victims, whether they are children or adults, if they know that the sacrifice they go through is going to stop the next genocide. It's going to contribute to humanity in a way that genocide is not acceptable anymore. I think it will make it easier on them. If they know that their sacrifice was meaningful and the child in Gaza, his lost limb is going to save another limb in Mexico, or an immigrant child limb in the United States, or another child dying in Congo or in Sudan. It gives you us at least some purpose. But knowing that whatever you lost is going to go down in vain will make it more catastrophic to the victims, both physically and mentally. Knowing that you lost might have a meaning, might not have the next catastrophe, by itself is therapeutic. That's why we really need to insist on accountability as humanity. Whatever happened will go down in vain, all the loss will go down in vain, all the victims of suffering, all what we all have been through will go down in vain. If a year from now, 2 years from now, another genocide happens somewhere else, and we fail again and again and again. So this should be our promise to the victims and to ourselves as part of our healing and as part of protecting humanity from these disasters going forward.
Yes, and if I can add quickly, strengthening the community which you're doing, because 2 weeks ago I received a message from one of the survivors who escaped war rape. She was attacked and she ran away from Prijedor, from the camps. She wrote me and said, I'm alone, I cannot survive easily and I have health issues. If I could send her something, because we work together. She's a Bosnian Muslim survivor, escaped rape. But through her I see how community is tired is not strengthened, and you are doing this, you are strengthening also community, enabling them to help each other, to support each other. And I will stop because you have another.
Factors Against Genocide is against genocide all over the
Yes.
place. It's not just in Gaza. We will start in Gaza, but please connect us. Connect us with those people, because I think we will bring them on. We want to hear from them on our webinars. We will listen to their stories. And luckily, we do have the funds to help them either monetarily or medically, or we have a lot of therapists, a lot of psychologists, a lot of
We
doctors.
have 25,000 medical professionals.
So we can
We can
help.
talk,
We can
but
help.
Anna has the
And you
question.
don't have to be just, it's not just for doctors. It's completely inclusive of anyone who's healthcare.
Thank
Health
you.
advocates, health advocates. Thank you so much. Thank you. Did you
Remember
have
that word smooth. Public, we have a question.
Sorry, I'll do my best to be brief, but I wanted to first thank you immensely for being here and for sharing these stories. And I'm really sorry for the losses of the family members. And I guess many of us didn't share. So I want to make an attempt to address a bit the elephant in the room, so bear with me. So the fact that I was pretty appalled, but I don't know, when I read the full program and I realized that the only panel with the word Palestine only was this one in an entire conference about genocide, right? And then that it turns out that it's you, doctors, actual doctors, the ones who do us actually useful stuff more than we do, who are speaking about it. So I think that's very telling of what has been diagnosed by many colleagues, senior colleagues and colleagues of you, Dr. Stanton, as a crisis in the field of genocide studies, right? A moral crisis. And I really want to stay with the work that you shared, Doctor, about being a field of forensics instead of a field of life. I think it's very telling. And there's other signs that we can talk about. I think the words that were said yesterday at the opening ceremony, or the words that were not said, were also very telling of what's happening here, right? The fact that the room is not full, the fact that this happened in this building, not in the one in front of us. That for me, I think it's just transparent. It's transparent, the crisis that has been diagnosed, in my opinion. And so that's something that I think we have to recognize, and we are going to have a harder time with this. Why are we actually doing this? Those are the questions that we should be answering. What does it mean to be a genocide scholar? In the times when we are watching one live stream, because the deaths continue, right? So I guess my question, the first one would be on that line of what exactly, why did you decide to come to this particular conference with this particular association, and what was the path to get here? That would be the first one. And then the second, now changing to your field of work, I am, from my point of view, I think the work of medical staff has been crucial to gather the evidence. Why? Because we know Israel has not allowed, UNRWA is basically not working there anymore. International journalists are not being allowed in, and so as it goes with Western media, often than not, Palestinian journalists are not believed, right? Or there's ways to justify the killing, which is a war crime. And then again, so we have also Palestinian medical staff in Gaza that have spoken bravely. And again, it happens that it's the international staff that might get a bit of time in Western media to speak, because they are believed, right? So as problematic as that is, and that, in my opinion, is blatantly racist, I would like to ask, it's a lot of the evidence comes from there, and they are also being questioned as they are being told that they are lying. There was a video that circulated some weeks ago, I live in Germany, where a parliamentary from the ruling party, CDU, asked, he was confronted with the evidence, especially of children, what was happening to children. And he said, well, that's not true, that's staged. Right? So repeating these lies, and I'm just really concerned about what that means for the field of medicine overall. Hospitals targeted, medical staff targeted, and then the justification of just really weird maneuvers in Western media, and the opinion of we are not even going to believe the doctors. So I'm very concerned about that, and I would like to hear from you on that.
So we have a workshop tomorrow. We are
Okay.
going to talk about about exactly that.
Okay.
Why is this? Why is there silencing? The media has been a tool in genocide. Medical associations have been a tool of genocide. Holocaust genocide museums are a tool of genocide. This has to change.
Actually, the remarks that I just gave were not my original remarks. My original remarks were exactly what you said, but I was advised not to be confrontational. I didn't think the genocide in Palestine has been enabled by this very same institution, by the same genocide scholars who claim to be studying genocide, by the media. Because if you are not European, if you are not white, if you are not the same color, your life is not worth as much. Whether it's the international law, whether it's the UN, whether it's the Genocide Convention, the genocide studies, these are all meant to protect one type of people. When the victims are other people, they are not considered important, and at best they can give more superficial or sympathetic thing. And the one place that's completely accepted or expected from this is Palestine. When it's Africa, maybe a little bit, something superficial. But if these same institutions really meant to prevent genocide, or genocide, believe me, they could have. But they are only meant to prevent one genocide. Never again is meant to protect one people. Even if that protection comes at the cost of genociding another people. So the fact that they are all over the field and covering everything, suffocating the air from anyone else to say something else, is intentional. It's by design to erase Palestine and to make the promise of never again for only one people, even at the cost of genocide.
I'd like to say something just in terms of like how we, as Dr. Against Genocide, try to kind of overcome this because, you know, we're a healthcare advocacy organization, but every aspect of our work is centering the survivors and the people who are impacted by genocide. And we started like doing these video webinars, maybe 50 people will show up. Now hundreds, sometimes thousands of people will show up, and we live stream it across all channels. So we actually built a platform that is absolutely centering the voices of the people who are impacted by genocide, and that's not just us now, but other genocides. Whenever we have access to those communities, sometimes it's challenging, but that work has to start. It has to start from everyone, and eventually the tides will shift, and the truth is going to be sourced from the actual source, which is the people impacted. But the scholarship has not actually gotten there. The scholarship has created this environment where the consumption of data and information is done for the sake of consuming data and information. Same thing with the entertainment industry. We've seen the Holocaust, you know, as an industry, right? Like for entertainment. And now we're seeing even, you know, Palestinian trauma televised as entertainment. So this distinction between consuming information and data for whatever purpose, scholarship, entertainment, you name it, or excellence, you know, versus really using the data, centering the voices of the people, and making sure that the truth is told and then acted upon is something, you know, we try to do, and I think it's something that every other organization should start to make. Because what is the purpose of institutions if the truth is covered by fancy words and scholarship? It really is embarrassing and shameful.
Yes. And I'll just briefly say to your question about like what's happening with the witnesses, because healthcare workers have become witnesses, right? So I brought up these points with my personal congressperson about what are we saying when we cannot bring ourselves to condemn the bombing of hospitals. What does that imply? And I told him to his face, you won't draw that red line because you're coming from a place of arrogance, because you don't think this will ever happen on U.S. soil. Okay? And so for you, there is a rule for you and there's a rule for other. And you're demonstrating to me exactly where you stand on these issues. Well, we don't operate on that same moral plane. And, you know, we would be having the same conversation about bombing hospitals, whether it was in Gaza, DC, Tel Aviv, doesn't matter where. It's wrong, period, full stop. Okay, you don't justify it. Okay, so, like, from there, and then the other thing I'll just say, you know, part of the reason why, you know, I made a purpose, pointed effort to say about how we had the audio files, okay, is because we have irrefutable evidence of what happened. Okay, we have pictures, we have videos, we have audio files. In addition to, my family was part of a case brought against Biden, Lincoln, and Austin. Okay, we are very active in all of this. I have a child who was targeted. Okay, we went legally and we won our case. Okay. All to say that we cannot let this stuff stand. And you know, part of the webinars, which you and I talked about this, when we first started these webinars, we talked, this was in January, we were in Geneva, and I said, Mesa, we have to archive these. We have to. This is contemporaneous testimony, you know, not for the dissection or for the forensic piece, but for truth. To have contemporaneous truth. And so, you know, we were doing this on the fly. We were sort of just doing what felt needed to be done, not knowing if it was the right thing to be done, but just innately saying, we better do this, and then we'll figure it out later if it was the right decision. And, you know,
But it's not something without risk.
yeah,
We I have been called to my hospital administration, and I have been warned. I get text messages from random people threatening me. Both of us have been arrested. And she has been arrested.
we're holding a sign that said, bread not bombs, what do children eat?
Yeah, so it's not,
Just to be fair, we cannot just blame the mainstream media and the genocide scholars and genocide institutions. Medicine has been the biggest failure. Medicine has been no show in genocide prevention, genocide work ever. When we first met Dr. Stanton, he was shocked, not because someone was trying to help him. He said, this is the first time I see doctors or nurses asking about this. I've never seen it before. This by itself is you know, it's unconscionable. If medicine was meant to protect life, and if you know that you can protect more lives by preventing one war or one genocide, then what you can spend billions of dollars in the ICUs, in the tertiary care, the high resource intensive medicine to preserve a life of a terminally ill person. You can save millions of lives. Then why medicine was not there? Why does it have to be there ever? We are the first medical organization of doctors to step into this field because, I mean, medicine itself has failed on everything else. Medicine relies on prevention. Because with prevention, you can save more life than waiting until the bombs start falling, until the pandemic spreads. That's why we start COVID, smallpox, all these things. We are buying vaccine because we prevent them. We screen for them because we can save more lives. And genocide is a societal and is a population illness or disease, both on the perpetrator side and on the victim side. And since it's a disease, there is early, risk and warning that you can detect and you can stop, you can prevent. Not a single major medical organization in the world said one word about the genocide in Gaza. Not one word. Not a single one of them passed a resolution for a ceasefire. A ceasefire. A ceasefire became a crime. Just saying a ceasefire. What does ceasefire mean? Stop killing. That's all. You don't need to be political. Don't take sides. You can still say Palestinians are terrible, Hamas is terrible, but stop the killing and let's find another way to solve things. We're not asking you to make a political statement. As a medical organization, at least say, let's stop the killing. This acts by itself was criminalized by every major medical organization in the West. This just tells you how much is the complicity, how much pervasive is it. And as doctors and workers have met our own failure before anyone else. So,
And I will just say that the phrase of medical neutrality has been bastardized, completely and utterly bastardized as an excuse for our associations and our cowardly colleagues to hide behind. It has been completely misused, completely and utterly misused.
Yes.
So we need to own that, and we have work to do.
Yes, and last September 17, it was a patient safety day dedicated to children. There were no words about children in Gaza. So, as you said,
There are people in all these associations that are mocking us.
Yeah, we're not just
And they're mocking this with all their power, and they're making everyone who questions them be called anti-Semitic.
were you on the webinar yesterday? Were you on the webinar yesterday?
No.
No?
No.
So one story yesterday, one of the doctors, his name is Dr. Firoz Silva, he's one of the doctors who went to Gaza on many missions. And actually, politically, he's not political, he's not with the Israelis, he has friends on both sides, he's very neutral politically, but when he went there, he saw crimes, he could not stay silent. His first article was giving all the doctors who went to Gaza just to report what they saw. And it made it to New York Times, was big time, big news. Of course, he was labeled as an anti-spy. The other article, they were able to publish like a month ago. And New England Journal of Medicine. They refused to allow them to use the word genocide.
Oh, yes.
of course.
Not even in quotes.
Not even.
They were trying to quote the PHR Israel, Physicians for Human Rights Israel, because they came to the conclusion this was genocide 2 months ago.
Yes.
So in their article, they said, we as doctors are also presenting what the PHRI said. They said that quoting them. They said no. They said, that's exactly what they're concluding.
They make them put war crimes.
War crimes, of
But
course.
this is not war
But the
crimes.
quote was because they turned the
Yeah,
quote
go
upside
ahead.
down.
Another example of that was how the New York Times treated the Armenian genocide. Peter Veliki, who's a very famous Armenian poet, Armenian American poet, he and I, when I was president of this organization, went to the New York Times to talk to their editors, and we said, stop calling them massacres. Call them genocide. Call it genocide. And we also had a few resolutions, got all these sorts of things. Finally, they refer to it as the Armenian genocide. It's exactly the excuse of denial. Don't use the word. And of course, we face it so much. You're right about this. This organization used to have a lot of activist organizations in it. They aren't here anymore. And I find that really tragic.
So this confirms that genocides do not happen due to lack of knowledge.
Exactly. Yes.
Genocides happen because the people in power, wherever they are, all of them, clearly know what is happening and they're interested in doing it. Do not believe that genocides happen by mistake or genocides happen because, when we first, start working about this, I really thought that we just go to DC and tell our elected officials the truth, tell them the number of children, the women, the innocent people being killed, and they would just go ahead and stop it. And we told them, we said, we know. So what? They deserve it. So it's not like that's exactly the same system.
One more comment. A member of this organization, Omar Barton,
Yes.
who is, of course, a Holocaust and genocide scholar, really known. He refusing to use the word genocide for, month after month after month. I've talked to him about this. He finally came out with an op-ed in the New York Times that called it genocide. You know what did it? He saw the evidence of shooting children in the head by the Israeli. And that is thing of denial is pervasive. Of course, now we've got a president who denies, you know, that we even had genocide against the Native Americans, against African Americans, and others. But this whole phenomenon of denial becomes a way in which new genocides are generated.
It's denial, but I don't think it's also intentional.
Oh, it is.
The genocide, I mean, one of our elected officials, one of the congressmen in the United States, when we asked him about this, he said genocide is a good business. It's bringing money to his constituents. The weapon manufacturer, they cannot keep up with making weapons. He cannot stop the genocide because it's bringing money to his, it's bringing more money to his people. So it's, some people are profiting from the genocide. That's true. A lot of them.